Imagine this. You are Juana de Peralta, and you are kneeling on cold stone in a windowless chamber beneath the Alhambra Palace in the spring of 1498. Your wrists are raw from iron shackles. The smell of burning wax mixes with something worse, the metallic scent of blood on instruments arranged carefully on a wooden table. Through the thick walls, you can hear nothing from the world above. No birds, no voices, nothing but your own breathing and the soft footsteps of the Inquisitor circling behind you. 3 days ago, royal guards came to your home in Granada. They took your children first, your daughter screaming as soldiers carried her away, your 2 sons too frightened to make a sound. Then they came for you. The charge is witchcraft and seduction of the king. But you know the truth. Queen Isabella of Castile has decided you must disappear. And when Isabella decides something, it happens with the efficiency of a military campaign and the cruelty of a woman who has perfected the art of destroying her rivals. What you are about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about the Catholic monarchs who unified Spain and launched the Age of Exploration. History remembers Isabella as a pious queen, a patron of Columbus, a defender of faith. But beneath the crown and the carefully constructed legend lies something far more sinister. For 30 years, Isabella waged a secret war against any woman who caught her husband Ferdinand's eye. This was not jealousy. This was systematic terror, executed with the precision of the Spanish Inquisition and the resources of an entire kingdom. The women who became Ferdinand's mistresses did not simply face scandal or exile. They faced imprisonment without trial, property confiscation, suspected poisoning, torture chambers, and, in some cases, executions designed for maximum suffering. Their children were ripped from their arms and sent to remote monasteries, never to be seen again. And through it all, Isabella maintained her reputation as the most virtuous queen in Christendom. The marriage that would create modern Spain began as a political calculation in 1469. Isabella of Castile was 18 years old, a princess with a disputed claim to her half-brother's throne. Ferdinand of Aragon was 17, a prince whose kingdom needed Castilian alliance. The marriage contract signed in Cervera that January laid out the terms of their partnership with legal precision. They would rule as equals, their kingdoms united but administratively separate. It was a merger of crowns, not a love match, but the young couple surprised everyone. Contemporary accounts describe genuine affection between them, shared ambitions, intellectual compatibility. For a brief moment, it seemed like a fairy tale. A young king and queen who actually liked each other, who worked together, who might build something remarkable. But Ferdinand was a man of prodigious appetites. By 1475, just 6 years into their marriage, court records from Zaragoza document his first known mistress. Aldonza Ruiz de Vora was a minor noblewoman, beautiful enough to catch the king's eye, connected enough to move in court circles, but not powerful enough to protect herself from what came next. When Isabella discovered the affair, something crystallized inside her. This would not be tolerated. Not ever, not once. Aldonza gave birth to Ferdinand's daughter, also named Juana, in 1470. The child was living proof of Ferdinand's betrayal. Isabella's response revealed the pattern that would define her reign. She did not rage or weep. She acted with cold precision. Aldonza found herself banned from court, her family's properties in Aragon suddenly facing tax investigations, her father's position as a royal administrator quietly eliminated. Within a year, Aldonza had retreated to a small estate, financially ruined, socially destroyed. She died in obscurity in 1483, possibly from illness, possibly from something else. Her daughter Juana was acknowledged by Ferdinand but received none of the privileges typically granted to royal bastards. Isabella made sure of that. The message was clear to every woman at court: catch the king's attention and face the queen's wrath. But here is where Isabella's methods became truly calculated. She understood that destroying mistresses required more than personal vendetta. It required institutional power, legal mechanisms, and a network of loyalists who would carry out her wishes without question. As Isabella consolidated her power through the 1480s, she built exactly that: the machinery of destruction. The case of Maria de Armendáriz reveals how Isabella's system operated. Maria was the daughter of a wealthy merchant family in Pamplona, educated, accomplished in music and poetry, exactly the kind of refined company that Ferdinand enjoyed. In 1482, she became his mistress. The affair lasted less than 6 months, but that was long enough. Royal investigators appeared at her father's warehouse, discovering supposed irregularities in his accounts. The family business collapsed within weeks. Maria herself received a visit from representatives of the Queen. They presented her with a choice, though it was not really a choice at all. She could enter the convent of Santa Maria la Real de las Huelgas immediately, taking vows of silence and seclusion, or she could face charges of corrupting the king through witchcraft. Maria chose the convent. She was 23 years old. Records from Las Huelgas show she remained there until her death in 1501, never once receiving a visitor, never once leaving the walls. 19 years of silence and stone, punishment for 6 months of being noticed by the wrong man. But imprisonment was just the beginning. Isabella weaponized every legal tool at her disposal. Royal decrees issued in 1482 established new inheritance laws that conveniently excluded children born of extramarital unions from any claim to royal property or titles. The language was careful, never mentioning Ferdinand's indiscretions directly, but the effect was precise. Any child he fathered outside marriage was legally erased, declared non-existent in official records. The mothers fared even worse. Property belonging to women accused of seducing the king could be confiscated by the crown. No trial was required. Isabella's word was sufficient. Testimonies preserved in Vatican archives describe Aragonese nobles complaining to the Pope about the Queen's overreach, but their protests went nowhere. Isabella's reputation as defender of the faith gave her immunity from criticism. Now that you have witnessed Isabella's systematic campaign against her rivals, you are beginning to understand the patterns hidden beneath Spain's golden age. If uncovering these buried truths about how power really operated in royal courts resonates with your curiosity about the real human experience, subscribing ensures you never miss these deep dives into history's most guarded secrets. Because what Isabella did next makes everything you have seen so far look like mercy. The 1490s brought a new level of terror. 3 of Ferdinand's known mistresses died within 18 months of each other, between 1493 and 1494. The official causes varied: sudden illness, a fall downstairs, complications from childbirth for a woman who was not pregnant. Death records from Toledo and Segovia document the facts but raise more questions than they answer. One case stands out. Beatriz Pereira was a Portuguese noblewoman who had caught Ferdinand's attention during diplomatic negotiations in 1492. She was sophisticated, spoke 4 languages, came from a family with connections to both Spanish and Portuguese courts. The affair was discreet, but Isabella's network discovered it anyway. Within 3 months, Beatriz fell violently ill after attending a royal banquet. The symptoms, preserved in letters from the papal nuncio, describe agonizing stomach pain, convulsions, and a death that took 5 days of suffering. The nuncio wrote carefully about the Queen's zealous protection of marriage, language that suggests he suspected but could not prove what had happened. Isabella's spy network was legendary, known among court insiders as the Queen's Eyes. She maintained a system of informants that penetrated every level of Spanish society. Servants in noble households reported to her. Priests heard confessions and passed along useful information. Even Ferdinand's own attendants owed their loyalty to Isabella first. No affair could remain hidden for long. Once identified, a mistress entered a nightmare of surveillance and persecution. Every letter was read, every conversation was reported, every movement was tracked. The psychological torture of being watched constantly, knowing that at any moment the machinery of destruction might turn toward you, broke many women before Isabella needed to take more direct action. But for those who did not break, for those who thought their family connections or their own cunning might protect them, Isabella had other tools. The torture chamber beneath the Alhambra Palace was not officially part of the Inquisition, though its methods were remarkably similar. Testimony from royal physician Rodrigo Maldonado, discovered in private correspondence, describes treating women for injuries consistent with interrogation: broken fingers, burns, damage from restraints. He never named the victims, but his careful documentation of dates corresponds exactly to periods when Ferdinand's mistresses disappeared from public view. One woman, he wrote, had injuries suggesting she had been suspended by her wrists for hours. Another showed signs of repeated beatings focused on areas that could be concealed by clothing. The children of these unions faced their own hell. Monastery records from San Pedro de Cardeña document the arrival of young boys, some as young as 5 years old, delivered by royal guards with orders that they were never to leave the monastery grounds. These were Ferdinand's sons, removed from their mothers and imprisoned in religious institutions for life. The monks were instructed to tell the boys their mothers were dead. Most never learned the truth. They grew up believing themselves orphans, raised in harsh conditions, forbidden from any contact with the outside world. Some took vows and became monks themselves, their royal blood forgotten. Others simply disappeared from the records entirely, their fates unknown. What happened next defies belief, even knowing everything that came before. In the spring of 1498, Isabella decided to make an example. Juana de Peralta had been Ferdinand's mistress for nearly 2 years, longer than any other woman had dared. She had borne him 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. Ferdinand, perhaps genuinely attached to her, had been unusually indiscreet, housing her in a villa in Granada, visiting openly, showering her with gifts. Isabella had watched this for months, letting the affair continue, letting Juana grow comfortable and confident. That was the trap. On April 15, 1498, royal guards arrested Juana on charges of witchcraft and seduction. The trial was scheduled for June in Valladolid. This was not simply persecution. This was public theater designed to terrify every woman in Spain. The trial records from Valladolid paint a picture of judicial horror. Juana faced inquisitors who had already decided her guilt. The evidence presented against her was absurd. She had used love potions. She had cast spells on the king. She had made a pact with demonic forces to seduce him. Witnesses testified, all of them servants in Isabella's employ, all of them describing supernatural events that defied reality. Juana's desperate denials meant nothing. The inquisitors had their script, and they followed it exactly. She was given opportunities to confess. Each refusal met with escalating punishment. Friar Antonio de Marchena, who witnessed the proceedings, wrote an account that circulated secretly among horrified clergy. He described the torture sessions in clinical detail. The strappado, where Juana was suspended by her wrists with weights attached to her feet. The rack, stretching her body until joints separated. The application of hot irons to the soles of her feet. Between sessions, inquisitors asked again if she would confess to witchcraft. She refused until her body gave out before her will did. The execution was designed for maximum suffering and maximum visibility. On June 27, 1498, Juana was led through the streets of Valladolid in chains. The crowds that gathered were enormous. Public execution of a king's mistress was unprecedented, and everyone wanted to witness it. She was burned at the stake, but the inquisitors had ordered green wood, which burns slowly and produces thick smoke that suffocates before the flames kill. It took nearly an hour. Eyewitnesses described her screams carrying across the city. They described how the smoke turned the afternoon sun orange. They described the smell. Isabella attended the execution, watching from a covered platform with her ladies in waiting. She showed no emotion, no satisfaction, no disgust. She simply watched until it was finished, then returned to the palace. But the destruction of Juana was not complete with her death. Her 3 children, aged 7, 5, and 3, were taken immediately after their mother's arrest. The two boys were sent to separate monasteries in remote regions of Castile, with orders that they were never to be told their parentage or allowed contact with each other. The daughter was placed in the custody of one of Isabella's most loyal allies, a duchess known for her harsh treatment of servants. The child was raised as a servant in the household, her royal blood a secret kept from everyone, including herself. She died at 16, according to records, from fever. Her brothers survived into adulthood, both becoming monks, both living their entire lives behind monastery walls, never knowing they were sons of a king. Ferdinand's reaction to Juana's execution reveals the power dynamics of this marriage. He did nothing. He made no attempt to intervene during the trial. He did not protest the execution. He did not try to protect his children. Whatever affection he felt for Juana, whatever paternal instinct might have moved him to act, he suppressed completely. Isabella had demonstrated that she controlled not just the mistresses but the king himself. Crosser and even royal blood provided no protection. The message echoed through every noble house in Spain. The queen's power was absolute, but Isabella had one more target. Alfonso de Aragon was Ferdinand's illegitimate son from an earlier affair, born before the marriage to Isabella. He was acknowledged, educated, given a title, everything that Isabella had prevented for later bastards. Alfonso had grown into a young man of considerable ability, serving as Archbishop of Zaragoza at just 16, clearly positioning himself for a powerful future. In September 1498, 3 months after Juana's execution, Isabella struck. A royal decree stripped Alfonso of his title and properties, citing unspecified moral failings. He was exiled from Spain entirely, sent to Naples with a small allowance and orders never to return. Ferdinand's eldest son, a reminder of his early indiscretions, disappeared from Spanish history. The official records were altered to minimize his existence. Later, chronicles barely mention him. Isabella had erased him as thoroughly as if he had never been born. The truth is even darker when you understand how Isabella institutionalized her methods. The purity of blood laws she expanded in 1501 created legal mechanisms for investigating and destroying anyone the crown targeted. Officially, these statutes were about religious orthodoxy, ensuring that conversos and moriscos could not infiltrate positions of power. But the investigative apparatus Isabella created served multiple purposes. Any woman could be subjected to inquiries about her bloodline, her family history, her religious practices. These investigations were tools of intimidation and control. A woman who caught the king's eye might suddenly find herself facing questions about her ancestry. The mere threat of investigation was often enough to drive women from court or convince them to enter convents voluntarily. Archaeological findings from excavations at Medina del Campo in 2018 revealed something that historians had long suspected but could not prove. Beneath the foundations of Isabella's favorite palace, workers discovered a mass grave containing the remains of at least 37 individuals, mostly young women, dating from the late 15th century. The burial was hasty and unmarked. Several skeletons showed signs of violent death. Others had been interred in positions suggesting they died from prolonged starvation or exposure. The discovery created controversy in Spain, with some historians arguing these were victims of plague or war, but the dating and location are too specific to ignore. These women died during Isabella's reign, on Isabella's property, and were buried in secret. The questions raised by this discovery remain largely unexamined by mainstream Spanish historians, but the implications are clear. The women who disappeared from court records did not always live out their days quietly in convents or distant estates. Some of them ended up in unmarked graves. Contemporary accounts from Venetian ambassadors stationed in Spain provide outsider perspectives that Spanish chroniclers carefully avoided. In 1502, Ambassador Marco Foscari wrote detailed dispatches describing the atmosphere of fear surrounding Ferdinand's personal life. He noted that the king had become almost celibate in his later years, avoiding any situation that might lead to temptation. Foscari attributed this to religious devotion, but his letters also describe how any woman seen speaking privately with Ferdinand would find herself investigated, questioned, sometimes removed from court entirely. The ambassador wrote about whisperings of past mistresses who had vanished, about families destroyed for the crime of having a beautiful daughter, about a queen whose jealousy had become pathological, but whose power made her untouchable. These dispatches, preserved in Venetian archives, provide evidence that Isabella's campaign was visible even to foreign observers, though no one dared speak openly about what they witnessed. The culture of fear Isabella created outlasted her own reign. When she died in 1504, Ferdinand immediately took a new mistress, Germaine de Foix, whom he actually married after Isabella's death. But the patterns Isabella established continued. Spanish noblewomen internalized the lessons of her reign. Affairs with powerful men became exponentially more dangerous. The protection of reputation became an obsession. Women who might have been mistresses in other courts chose convents instead, preferring religious life to the risk of royal attention. The systematic oppression of women through legal mechanisms, the weaponization of purity investigations, the use of torture and imprisonment without trial, all of these became normalized in Spanish society. Isabella's methods became a template that would influence Spanish culture for generations. Death records from the years of Isabella's reign show unusual mortality patterns among young women associated with the court. Between 1480 and 1504, at least 47 women aged between 18 and 35 died under circumstances recorded vaguely as sudden illness or accident. This is a statistically significant anomaly. Noble women typically had access to better food, housing, and medical care than the general population. Yet these women died at rates comparable to peasants during famine years. Modern historians who have studied these records note the correlations but are careful about drawing definite conclusions. The evidence is circumstantial, but pattern after pattern after pattern begins to look less like coincidence and more like policy. Ferdinand's final mistress appeared in 1502, 2 years before Isabella's death. Her name is not recorded in any surviving document. She exists only as references in financial records, payments made to a household in Seville, gifts of jewelry that appear and then disappear from royal inventories. Within 3 months of the first reference, the payments stop. The household in Seville is reassigned. The jewelry is never mentioned again. The woman, whoever she was, vanished so completely that we do not even know her name. This is perhaps the most chilling testament to Isabella's efficiency. By the end of her reign, she could make people disappear so thoroughly that not even a name survived. Standing in the shadow of the Alhambra today, tourists photograph the beautiful Islamic architecture, the fountain courts, the intricate tile work. Guides tell stories about the Reconquista, about Isabella and Ferdinand taking Granada from the Moors in 1492, ending Muslim rule in Spain. They talk about Columbus, about the unification of Spain, about the beginning of the Spanish Golden Age. What they do not tell you is that beneath those beautiful courtyards, beneath the foundations of royal power, lay the bones of women whose crime was being noticed by the wrong man. They do not tell you about the torture chambers, the midnight arrests, the children ripped from their mother's arms. They do not tell you that the queen who funded the discovery of the New World also perfected methods of terror that would influence European statecraft for centuries. The machinery Isabella built did not disappear with her death. The Inquisition she strengthened would continue for another 300 years. The legal mechanisms for persecuting women based on accusations of seduction and witchcraft would spread throughout Catholic Europe. The culture of silence she enforced, where witnesses to atrocity learned to see nothing and say nothing, became embedded in Spanish institutions. When we talk about the Spanish Golden Age, we are talking about an empire built partially on the systematic destruction of women who threatened one woman's control over her husband and her throne. You came into this story thinking Isabella was simply a powerful queen who unified Spain. Now you leave understanding she was an architect of systematic terror who weaponized every institution at her disposal to destroy women who threatened her control. This transformation of perspective is exactly why these hidden histories matter. If this journey of discovery has awakened your appetite for truth about how power really works behind royal legends, subscribing means you will continue accessing these revelations that textbooks will not teach. Your curiosity about the real human experience behind history's heroes deserves to be fed. The women Isabella destroyed were not villains or victims who deserved their fates. They were human beings who made choices in a world that gave them few options, who loved or desired or simply existed in proximity to power, and who paid for that proximity with their lives, their freedom, their children, everything they had. Maria de Armendáriz died in her convent cell after 19 years of silence, never having committed a crime except existing. Beatriz Pereira died screaming from poison that took 5 days to kill her, her only sin being beautiful and Portuguese. Juana de Peralta burned alive for bearing the king's children, her death a public spectacle designed to terrorize an entire nation of women. The unnamed mistress of 1502 disappeared so completely that even her name was erased from history, leaving only gaps in financial records to mark that she ever lived. Isabella of Castile died in 1504 at the age of 53, having ruled for 30 years. Her funeral was magnificent. The Pope sent condolences. The entire Christian world mourned the loss of the Catholic queen who had driven the Moors from Spain and brought the faith to the New World. Her tomb in the Royal Chapel of Granada is one of the most beautiful in Europe, surrounded by the symbols of her achievements, her crown, her scepter, the emblems of Castile and Aragon united. The inscription praises her piety, her wisdom, her devotion to God and country. There is no mention of the women she destroyed, the children she stole, the lives she ended to protect her pride and her power. History, as always, is written by the victorious, and Isabella was nothing if not victorious. But the bones beneath Medina del Campo tell a different story. The empty cells of forgotten convents hold different truths, and in the silence where names used to be, in the gaps in the records where women once existed, the real history whispers its testimony to anyone willing to listen.